The frost came early to Thorncombe that year, and it came the way frost always did there. First on the low wall by the lich gate, then on the yew needles, then last of all on the stone dove that sat with its wings folded over a grave no one had tended in longer than anyone in the village could rightly say. The churchyard smelled of wet slate and box hedge, and the thin bitter smoke of Reverend Coyle's fire, and under all of it, faint, the green smell of moss eating its slow way across marble. She was the kind of woman a churchyard remembered better than a parlour did. Susanna Bellamy was not spoken of at the assemblies, because she was never at the assemblies. She mended linen for 3 families who paid her in coin, and one who paid her in kindness, which was worse, and on Tuesdays and Fridays she came to the churchyard with a stiff brush and a pair of shears that had been her father's, and she cleared what wanted clearing. She was 25. She had buried a father and never known a mother, and she had one talent the village found more useful than pretty. She could read, and she could read stone, which was not the same thing at all. She knew the names on every marker in that yard, knew which had sunk and which had cracked, and which the ivy would take by spring if no one stopped it. The dove stone was going to disappear before the frost was through. She had watched the bramble close over its base a little more each week since October, and she had made up her mind, the way she made up her mind about most things, without telling anyone, that she would clear it before the ground froze hard enough to keep her out. Subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss where this one goes. She had not always tended that particular grave. It had been Nan Whitlock's charge for 30 years, ever since the lady who lay under the dove had died and been put there quietly, with no crest on the stone and no title carved beneath the name. Only Eleanor and 2 dates, and, smaller, she was kind. Nan had scrubbed that stone every month of her life until her hip failed her 2 winters past. And now Nan sat by a cold grate in a cottage at the end of Mill Lane. And someone had to do it, and there was no one else who would, so it was Susanna. She had never asked why the lady's family did not come. Nan did not offer it, and Susanna did not press for it. She had long ago decided that some silences were kept out of grief, and some out of shame, and it was not her place to sort which was which. She only knew the stone deserved better than bramble, and that was reason enough. That Tuesday she knelt in the wet grass with her sleeves pinned back, and worked the moss free with the flat of a knife, patient, 1 thumb's width at a time. And she did not hear the gate. A man stood beyond the yew at the far end of the yard for the better part of 20 minutes before she knew he was there at all. He had come into the village the evening before under the name of Mr. Gabriel Hart, a gentleman of no particular business, taking the best room the Thorncombe Inn had to offer, which was not very good. He had told the innkeeper he meant to look into the parish registers for a family history, and the innkeeper had believed him, because there was no reason not to. He was not a large man in the way dukes were meant to be large in the stories the servants told below stairs. He was tall enough and hard enough about the jaw, with a nose that had been broken once and set badly, and eyes the brown of turned earth, and he moved the way men moved, who had spent their whole lives being watched, and had grown careful about it. He had come to see his mother's grave, and he had come alone, and he had told no one at Sherborne Hall that he was going, because the one person who would have asked why was the one person he did not wish to answer. He found the gate unlatched, and the yard empty of everyone but a woman on her knees in the wet grass, working a knife blade under 30 years of moss, with the unhurried care of someone who expected no one to see her do it, and no one to thank her for it after. He did not go to her. He did not speak. He stood where the yew shadow covered him, and he watched a woman he had never met clear his mother's grave stone by stone, and something in his chest that had been shut for a long while came open an inch, quietly, the way a door comes open when the latch was never quite true. She did not know then that the man watching her from the yew was the Duke of Sherborne, or that the stone under her hands bore his mother's name, or that he had spent 11 years paying a debt to that grave in the only coin his family would let him spend on it, which was silence. She only knew, when she finally rose and pressed both hands flat against the small of her back to ease it, that the light had gone gold and long, and that the dove's wings were clean, and that no one had seen her do it, which was as it should be. She gathered her tools and went to see to Nan, and she thought no more about it, because there was nothing yet to think. The moss came away easier than the ivy did. Susanna worked the shears through the last of it, while the light thinned toward evening, and by the time she stood the dove's stone face was bare and pale and honest, the letters standing clear for the first time in longer than she had known the yard. Eleanor, she was kind. She traced the 2 words once with a knuckle, the way she always did. Not from sentiment, she told herself, but because a mason's hand ought to be respected, and then she gathered the cut bramble into her apron to carry to the burn heaped by the wall. The man under the yew watched her carry it. He watched her stop twice along the path, once to right a fallen marker 2 rows over that had nothing to do with her task. Setting it upright, with her boot braced against the base, and both hands hauling, and once to pull a fistful of chickweed from around a child's stone with no name on it at all, a stone so small and so plain that most eyes went past it without seeing it was there. She was not being watched, she believed. She acted as though the whole world had gone home for supper. That was the thing that undid him, in the end, more than the dovestone itself. Anyone might clean a grave for a shilling. She had cleaned 3 that no one had asked her to touch, for no one, and had not once looked round to see if anyone marked it. He waited until she had gone through the lit gate and down the lane before he crossed the yard himself. He stood over his mother's stone a long while in the failing light, and he did not weep, because he had trained himself out of it years before, but his hand shook faintly when he set it flat against the cold marble, and he was glad, in a distant way, that there was no one left in the yard to see that either. "You have been cleaner kept than I left you," he said, very low, to a woman 11 years in the ground who could not answer him. "I do not know who did it. I mean to find out." He walked back to the inn in the dark with his boots wet through, and his mind working the way it worked when a thing would not let him alone, turning the woman in the grey shawl over and over, trying to place her among the handful of names the innkeeper had let fall over supper the night before. He did not sleep well. He told himself it was the strange bed. The next morning he asked the innkeeper's wife, in the mild, unhurried way a man asks after a horse he might buy, whether there was a woman in the village who kept the churchyard tidy, dark-haired, quiet, not young enough to be a girl, and not old enough to be spoken of as anything but Miss. "That'll be Susanna Bellamy," the innkeeper's wife said, wiping a cup that did not need it. "Does it for love, that one, not for coin. Old Nan Whitlock used to keep it, before her hip went, and Susanna took it up without being asked, the way she takes everything up. Sits with Nan of an evening too, reads to her. Nan can't read for herself, never could. She set the cup down. You'll not get her to take payment for it, if that's your thought, sir, tried myself once. She looked at me like I'd offered her a slap. Gabriel Hart thanked her and said nothing more, but he carried the name Susanna Bellamy back up to his room and turned it over the way he had turned the moss and the bramble and the shaking of his own hand the evening before, and by the time he came down again he had decided two things. He would not tell her who he was. Not yet. Not until he understood what manner of woman did such work, with no one to see it, and no coin to show for it. And he would find some way to be useful to her that she could not refuse, because a man did not walk away from a debt merely for want of a graceful way to pay it. He did not know that Susanna had already refused payment twice that week. Once from the sexton, who tried to press twopence on her from the poor box, which she would not touch, and once from Reverend Coyle himself, who offered to write to the bishop's fund on her behalf for the work, an offer she turned aside so plainly that the vicar did not raise it again. She had her reasons, simple ones. She had not done it to be paid. Being paid would have made it a different thing entirely, a smaller thing, and she wanted the larger one. Mr. Hart came to church that Sunday, which surprised no one, since strangers researching family histories were understood to have an interest in registers, and therefore in vicars. He sat at the back and watched the woman in the grey, shawl 3 rows up, who sang without looking at the hymnal because she did not need it, and who did not once turn to see who watched her, because it had never occurred to her that anyone would. Afterward he found Reverend Coyle in the vestry, and asked, off-hand, whether the parish had need of a proper keeper for the yard, someone paid a fair wage from a fund he would be glad to establish, anonymous through the church, for upkeep only, no names attached to it, and no questions asked of anyone who benefited. Generous of you, sir, for a man 3 days in the village, the vicar said, not unkindly, watching him with the particular patience of men who had spent their lives reading what people did not say. I have an interest in old stones, Mr. Hart said, and in seeing them kept. The vicar let that stand, though his eyes did not quite believe it, and by the following week a small sum had begun arriving at the parish for the maintenance of the churchyard, delivered by the innkeeper's boy, with no letter attached and no name given, only a request passed on faithfully, that whoever did the work of keeping the yard should be paid something for her trouble, whether she wished it or not, and that the money should never be spoken of as coming from any particular hand. Susanna found 4 shillings left for her at the vicarage that Friday, wrapped in plain paper, with Reverend Coyle unable to tell her where they had come from beyond a stranger's charity, and she stood in the vicarage hall, turning the paper over as though the answer might be written on the other side of it. Someone thinks I want paying, she said. Someone thinks you deserve it, the vicar said. There is a difference, though I grant you may not see it that way. She did not spend the shillings. She put them in the tin box under her bed where she kept what little she had, and she went on with her Tuesdays and Fridays exactly as before, and if she thought about the stranger who had asked after her, she did not let herself think long, because thinking long about a gentleman's interest in a poor woman rarely led anywhere a poor woman ought to go. She did not know that the same gentleman had begun, that same week, to visit Nan Whitlock's cottage under the pretence of an interest in old parish families, and that he sat by Nan's cold grate for an hour at a time, listening to a stooped, half-blind old woman talk about a mistress she had loved and lost and buried far from the family that ought to have wept for her, and that he left, each time. A little more than the coal cost, folded under a plate, said to be from no one at all. He found a reason to speak to Susanna herself within the fortnight, because a man cannot indefinitely watch a woman from behind a yew tree and call it research. He came to her one grey afternoon, while she knelt at a stone 2 rows from the dove, a stone so worn the name had gone from it entirely, and he said, from a respectful distance, that he understood she knew every name in that yard, worn stone or no, and that he had been set the task, by an interested party he did not name, of setting down a proper record of the parish dead before the weather took the rest of the letters for good. And would she consent to help him, for a fair wage, since her knowledge was worth more than his eyes? She looked up at him a long moment before she answered, the way she looked at anything before she trusted it. "You're the gentleman asking after me," she said. "I am a gentleman asking after the churchyard," he said. "You happen to be attached to it. That's a careful way of putting it." "I am a careful man." She almost smiled. She did not, quite, but something in her face eased, the way ice eases before it breaks, and she said she would think on it, and 2 days later she came to the inn parlour with a ledger of her own making, names and dates set down in a hand steadier than his, and told him plainly that she would help him for 1 shilling a week, and not a farthing more, because she would not be made to feel bought. "Agreed," he said, "though I warn you, I intend to argue for 2. "You may argue," she said. "I intend to lose the argument on my own terms." He laughed, once short and surprised, the way a door bangs when a wind catches it unexpected, and she looked at him as though she had not thought him capable of it, which she had not. They worked through November that way, an hour here and an hour there, stone by stone, Susanna reading names worn near to nothing, and Gabriel writing them down in a plain hand that gave away nothing of who had taught it to him. He learned, without asking directly, that her father had been a mason himself, which was where the reading of stone had come from, and that he had died of a fever when she was 19, and left her his tools and no money, and that she had never once, in the years since, considered herself unlucky, because she had a roof and hands that worked, and Nan to sit with of an evening, and that was, in her accounting, riches enough. She learned in turn only what he let her learn, which was less. That he had lost his mother young, that his father had been a hard man, who had not forgiven his mother something she had never told him what, that he had once been promised to a woman who had wept beautifully in company, and been cruel to a maid in private, and that the breaking of it had taught him to watch what people did when they believed themselves unwatched, rather than what they said when they knew they were not. "That seems a lonely way to judge a person," she said, on the day he told her that much and no more. "It is the only honest way I have found," he said. "Most people can manage kindness for an audience. Fewer can manage it for no one at all." She did not answer that. She only bent back to the stone in front of her, and worked the moss from the last letter of a name that had not been spoken aloud in 40 years, and he watched her do it, and thought, not for the first time, that he had found without seeking it the very proof he had come to Thorncombe, half hoping and half fearing he would never find. He began, in that same week, quietly, through the same nameless fund, to see that Nan Whitlock's coal never ran short, and that a physician from the county town called on her once a month whether she asked for him or not, and Susanna, who noticed everything about that cottage because she loved the woman in it, noticed the coal and the doctor, and could not account for either, and set it down, in the end, to the general and unaccountable mercy of the parish, because it did not occur to her that mercy might have a single face, and that the face might be sitting in her own inn parlour twice a week, with ink on his fingers. Lady Cordelia Farrow arrived in Thorncombe on a Thursday in the 2nd week of December, in a carriage too fine for the lane it travelled, and the whole village knew within the hour that the Duke of Sherborne's cousin had come looking for him, because he had been gone from the hall above a fortnight, and had told no one where, which was not like him, and which had made her, in her own words to the innkeeper, extremely put out. She found him, in the end, in the churchyard, standing beside a woman in a grey shawl over a stone, with a dove carved into its crown. And the sight of the two of them together, heads bent to the same worn letters, did something to Lady Cordelia's face that she did not trouble to hide. "Gabriel," she said, and her voice carried the particular brightness of a woman about to be cutting and wishing everyone to know she considered it a kindness. "I had begun to think you'd been murdered on the road. Imagine my relief. Playing at gravestones with the local charity case instead." Susanna went very still. She did not know the name Gabriel belonged to the man beside her, not yet, not in any way that mattered, but she understood at once, from the shape of the sentence, what she had just been called. "Cordelia," Gabriel said, and there was iron under it that had not been in his voice before, not once, in all the weeks Susanna had known him. "I only wonder," Lady Cordelia went on, turning her attention fully on to Susanna now, taking her in from bonnet to boot with the frank, assessing cruelty of a woman who had never once in her life had to wonder where her next meal would come from, what a girl in a mended shawl imagines she is doing, kneeling over that particular stone as though she had any right to it. Some of us remember whose it is. Some of us remember why the family stopped coming, and it was not for lack of carriages. "I know whose it is," Susanna said. Her voice did not shake. "It is a woman's grave who no one has troubled to visit in 11 years, and it wanted cleaning, and I am glad to have done it, and I would do it again tomorrow, whether you liked the look of my shawl or not." Lady Cordelia's laugh came out in 3 short, practised beats, a sound with no warmth in it at all. How very moral. And how very ignorant. "That is the late Duchess of Sherborne you have been fussing over with your little brush girl, his mother." She tipped her chin at Gabriel without looking at him. "The family did not come because the family had reason not to, reasons that are none of your concern, and it is not for a mender of linen to decide that our grief wants tidying." "Then you might have come and told the stone so yourself," Susanna said, "instead of leaving it to bramble and to strangers." For a moment nobody spoke. A rook called once from the yew and went still. Gabriel did not move to defend her. He did not need to. She had not left room for it, and something in the set of his jaw said he had not expected he would need to. But he stepped, quietly, to stand beside her rather than between her and his cousin, which said what it needed to say without a word spent on it, and Lady Cordelia read it correctly, and did not like what she read. "We shall speak of this at the hall," she told Gabriel, and swept back toward her carriage without another glance at Susanna, though the set of her shoulders promised that the matter was very far from finished. Susanna stood a long moment after the carriage wheels had gone quiet on the lane, looking at the man beside her with a stillness that was not calm at all, only the appearance of it, carefully held. "Gabriel," she said, testing the shape of it. "She did not call you Mr. Hartnell," he said. "She did not. Who are you?" He looked at the stone, and then at her, and for the first time since she had known him he did not have a ready answer, only the truth, and the truth was not his to give yet, not whole, not standing in a churchyard, with his cousin's carriage still turning at the end of the lane. "I owe you a longer answer than I can give you standing here," he said. "I ask you to let me give it properly." "Soon you might have told me who I was working beside," she said, "for $1 a week." "I might have," he agreed. "I did not, because I wanted to know who you were before you knew what I was. I see now that was a cruelty I did not intend as one. I am sorry for it." She did not answer that either. She gathered her shears and her knife, and went home along the lane with her back very straight, and she did not look round to see whether he watched her go, because she found, to her own surprise, that she did not want to know. She did not go to the churchyard the next day, nor the day after that. It was not that she had stopped loving the Gravestone, or stopped believing the child's grave and the fallen marker wanted tending. It was that she could no longer kneel over Eleanor Rourke's grave without feeling watched by the whole weight of a family that had called her a charity case to her face, and she had spent her whole life making certain no one ever had cause to say such a thing of her again. She sat instead with Nan, who noticed the change in her at once, because Nan noticed everything, blind as her eyes had gone. "You've stopped going," Nan said on the second evening, feeling for Susanna's hand and finding it. "I can hear it in your voice, you've stopped." "There's a lady come," Susanna said. "The Duke's cousin. She called me a charity case, in front of him." "And is he the Duke, then?" Nan said, very mild. "You're Mr. Hart." Susanna's hand went still in the old woman's grip. "You knew. I've known his voice for weeks, child. I knew it the first evening he came sitting by my grate, asking questions no stranger to this village would think to ask, about coal and doctors and whether I wanted for anything. And I said to myself, well, either that is a very thorough historian, or that is her son come back to see what's left of her, and I did not think it my place to say which. When he seemed no more ready to own it than you seem ready to hear it." Susanna sat with that a long while, the fire ticking low, Nan's hand dry and light in her own. "Why would a duke trouble himself with an old woman's coal?" she said at last, "if he meant to keep it secret. What is the good of a kindness no one is allowed to know he did?" "That," said Nan, "is rather the whole of the good of it, I'd have thought. Ask him. He owes you the asking more than he owes it to me." Susanna did not go to him. Pride or caution or something too tangled to name kept her from the inn, and she told herself she was waiting for the wound of Lady Cordelia's words to close over before she let anyone near it, when in truth it was not the wound she feared reopening, but the hope underneath it, which frightened her a good deal more. It was the vicar who broke the silence for her, in the end, 3 days later, arriving at her door with his hat in his hand, and an expression she had never seen him wear. "I think you had best come and hear this from someone who is not him," Reverend Coyle said, "because I do not believe he will tell it in a way that does himself justice, and it is a story that deserves to be told fairly." She went, because it was the vicar asking, and because some part of her had been waiting 3 days for exactly such a knock. He told her, sitting in her own small kitchen, with his hands wrapped round a cup of tea gone cold, everything he had pieced together over the past month, and confirmed only that afternoon with a letter from a colleague near Sherborne Hall, that the fund for the churchyard's upkeep had come from the Duke himself, delivered under no name, on the express condition it never be traced. That Nan Whitlock's coal and her doctor had been paid the same way, for 11 years, since before Susanna had ever taken up the shears, longer than anyone had guessed. That the old Duke, Gabriel's father, had driven his own wife out to a dower cottage near Thorncombe, years before her death, ashamed of her habit of giving away in charity what he thought ought to be kept for pride, and that when she died there, alone, he had forbidden the family to make a show of grief for a woman he had spent her last years disowning in all but name, and Gabriel, then a young man with no power to gainsay his father, had gone along with the silence because he had not known how else to survive his own house. He has spent every year since trying to pay a debt his father would not let him pay openly while the old man lived, the vicar said, and since the old Duke died, he has kept paying it quietly still, out of habit, or shame, or grief, I could not say which. I think he did not know how to stop being secret about a kindness once he had learnt to be secret about it. And then he came here meaning only to stand at his mother's grave alone, and found you already keeping it better than his own family ever had, and I think, Miss Bellamy, whatever else is true, that undid him rather thoroughly. Susanna sat very still, her tea also gone cold in front of her, and thought of 4 shillings wrapped in plain paper, and coal that never ran short, and a doctor who called whether asked for or not, and a man who had laughed once, short and surprised, as though he had forgotten he still could. He might have told me, she said, but there was no heat left in it. He might have, the vicar agreed. I expect he was afraid that once you knew what he was, you would stop treating him as though he were merely a man. It is not, I think, an unreasonable fear in his position. Most people do. She sent word to the inn that evening, 3 lines only, asking him to come to the vicarage the following afternoon, because she found she did not want to hear the rest of it standing in a churchyard with a rook watching from the yew, and she did not want to hear it in his room at the inn either, with the whole village able to count how long he stayed. She wanted a small room and a fire, and no one else to see either of their faces while the truth was finally said plain. He came the next day at the hour she had named, and Reverend Coyle, with the tact of a man who had spent a lifetime knowing when to leave a room, found sudden business in the church and left them the small parlour and its low fire and its 2 chairs drawn near the hearth. Gabriel did not sit at once. He stood with his back to the fire and his hands loose at his sides, and he looked, for the first time since she had known him, entirely without the careful stillness he wore like a coat. "My name is Gabriel Rourke," he said. "I am the Duke of Sherborne. The grave you have been tending is my mother's, and I have known that from the first evening I watched you clear it, and I let you go on not knowing, and I am sorry for every week of it." She did not speak. She had expected the words, and still found she had no ready answer for the sound of them. "I came to Thorncombe meaning to stand at her stone alone, and be ashamed in private, the way I have been ashamed in private for 11 years," he went on. "I found it already clean. I found a woman on her knees in the wet grass, doing for a stranger's grave what my own family would not do for our own blood, and doing it, as far as I could tell, expecting nothing at all from it, not thanks, not payment, not even the satisfaction of being seen to do it, since you did not know you were seen. I have spent a great deal of my life around people who are extremely good at being good when someone is watching. I had begun to believe that was the only kind of goodness left. I wanted to know what you did when you believed no one of any consequence could see you at all. That was the only test I trusted to tell me the truth of a person, and you passed it before I had even thought to set it. That is a cold way to court a woman, she said, testing her like a horse at market. It was not courtship at first, he said. It was only grief, wearing a disguise because I did not know how else to carry it. The courtship came after, and I did not intend it, and I did not know how to stop it once it had begun, and I am telling you plainly now, because you deserve the whole of it, not the careful half I have been giving you for a month. I am not asking you to forgive the disguise tonight. I am asking only that you let me be honest with you from this hour forward, whatever you decide to do with the honesty. "And what am I to decide?" she said. "Nothing tonight," he said. That is rather the point. I will not press you for an answer you have not had time to want to give. I would rather have your no, freely given, when you have had a season to think it over, than your yes tonight, because you feel the weight of my name and do not know how to refuse a duke standing in a vicar's parlour. You are not obliged to me for the coal, or the doctor, or the shillings, or anything else. Those were paid because they were owed, not because I meant to buy your regard with them. Whatever you choose, they stand as they are, given and not returned. She looked at him a long while, the fire popping once between them, and something in her chest that had been braced since Lady Cordelia's carriage first appeared in the lane came slowly, carefully, undone. You might have simply told me, she said again, quieter this time, who you were, from the first. I might have, he said. I was afraid of what you would become in front of me, if you knew. I have watched a great many people learn my rank and change their shape to fit it. I did not want to watch you do the same. I think, now, I ought to have trusted you sooner not to. I would not have, she said. Changed my shape. I have never known how. I begin to believe that, he said, is the truest thing about you. Snow had begun again outside the small window by the time either of them spoke further, soft against the glass, and the fire had burned low, and neither moved to build it up. You said you would not press me, she said at last. I find I do not need pressing. I have had a month to think it, whether I meant to or not. Susanna, her name plain, no title fastened to it. The first time he had used it without her surname trailing behind. Do not answer tonight for my sake. Answer only if the answer is already whole in you, and not a kindness you think you owe me for the coal. It is not for the coal, she said. It never was. I loved a man called Mr. Hart before I ever heard the word Duke attached to him, and I find the word has not changed what I loved. I will marry you, Gabriel Rourke, if the offer still stands after so plain a courtship, and I will thank you to never again let me discover who you are from your cousin's mouth instead of your own. Never again, he said. You have my word on it, and I have grown fonder of keeping my word than I ever was of keeping my secrets. One more thing, she said, and there was the faintest ghost of dry humour in it now, the first he had heard from her since the churchyard. I should like to be spoken to plainly from this day forward, no fund with no name attached. If you mean to be generous, you may say so to my face, and let me argue with you about it properly. Agreed, he said, though I warn you, I intend to argue back. You may argue, she said. I intend to lose the argument on my own terms. And that undid him more than the yes had, because it was the very words she had given him the first day they struck their bargain over £1 a week, and he laughed again, the short, surprised sound she had only heard from him twice now, and this time she let herself smile back at it, whole and unguarded, for the first time since he had known her. He crossed the small space between the two chairs and drew off one glove, finger by finger, slow and deliberate, before he took her bare hand in his, and she did not pull away. Thank you, he said, for not knowing me first as a duke. Thank you, she said, for not letting me stay ignorant of it forever. They sat a while longer by the low fire, saying little else that mattered enough to be set down, and outside the snow went on falling over the churchyard, and the Gravestone, and the whole quiet sleeping village, patient the way snow always is, settling on the wall and the yew, and the small, unnamed grave alike, covering nothing that would not be found again, come spring. Lady Cordelia Farrow left Sherborne Hall before the new year, for an aunt's house in Bath she had long claimed to despise, and she did not attend the wedding that followed in the spring. small as a duke's wedding could be made. In the little Thorncombe church with its cold stone floor Reverend Coyle presiding, Nan Whitlock seated in the best chair the vicarage owned with a shawl new enough it, still smelled of the shop. Mrs. Petch, who had run Sherborne Hall's household for 20 years and kept more of the Duke's secrets than anyone living, wept openly through the whole of the service and told anyone who would listen afterward that she had always known her master's charity would find him out one day, one way or another, and had rather hoped it would. Nan lived out the rest of her years in a snug cottage on the Sherborne grounds, coal never wanting, a girl sent up daily to read to her whether she asked for it or not, and she went to her own rest 3 years later, with Susanna's hand in hers, and a stone of her own, plain and well kept, not 30 yards from her old mistress's, so that neither of them would ever again lie forgotten, while the other watched over the gap between. The dovestone itself never wanted for flowers again. Susanna kept it herself, still, every spring and every autumn, not because it was owed to her now, and not because anyone watched her do it, but because she had never learned to love a thing by halves, and some habits, once true, are not meant to be broken, merely because the reason for keeping them has changed. A year to the week after the small wedding, they stood together at the grave, in the last low light of an autumn afternoon, Gabriel's bare hand around Susanna's, the dove's wings pale against the darkening stone, and neither of them spoke for a long while, because there was nothing left between them that wanted saying aloud. A rook called once from the yew, and went still. Their hands did not let go. It is a plain enough thing to learn, in the end, though it takes some people a lifetime, and some a single churchyard afternoon. Character is not what a person shows the room. It is what a person does in the one corner of the world they believe entirely empty of witnesses, and it is there, if anywhere, that a person's worth is finally, quietly, and truthfully proven. That is the whole of it, and I hope this one found its way into your heart the way a forgotten grave found its way into hers. If you have ever done a kindness you are certain no one saw, or wondered whether it mattered without an audience for it, I would love to know in the comments what it was, and whether you still think of it. If stories like Susanna and Gabriel's are the kind that stay with you, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you too. There is another quiet kindness waiting to be told, and I will be back soon to tell it.